Let's take a look at this question. Here we want to write a program to take a number as input from the user and find and display the factorial of the number. What's a factorial? A factorial is just a product of all consecutive integers from 1 till that number. So if we take something like 5 and I want to find out the factorial of 5 factorial. So this exclamation mark just represents a factorial, but 5 factorial is just equal to 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. It's going to be equal to 120. You can see that starting from 1, we're going to multiply it with every consecutive integer till we reach 5. We can take another example with 3. If you want to find out the factorial of 3, I can represent that as 3 and an exclamation mark. That is equal to 3 times 2 times 1. That's going to be equal to 6. So the factorial of 3 is just 6. Since I want to write a program over here, we can first identify exactly what we want to do in this program. The first thing we'll need to do is we need to take the number as input from the user. We could use something like a scanner class to do this. Then we'll need to find the factorial of the number. And finally, once we find the factorial, we need to display the factorial of the number. It's a pretty simple program. We'll start writing the program with our first step. So we want to take the number as input. To do this, I'm going to be using the scanner class. And since we already imported the util package, I can directly create the object of the scanner class. I'm going to name this object essay. And once I create this object, I'm going to have to tell the user to enter the value. To do this, we can just use a println statement. I can say system.out.println and I can just print enter number. Once we ask the user to enter a number, I need to store this in a variable. So I'm going to make a variable called num. And here, what's important is that you can't take a factorial for something like a decimal. It doesn't make sense to say 3.5 factorial. We can only take factorials for integers. So this variable num is going to be a variable of the int data type. And I'm going to be using the nextInt method to take the input. And with that, we're done with our first step. We took the number as input from the user. Then we want to find out the factorial of the number. Now, a factorial, as you can see in the question, is just a product of all consecutive integers from 1 till that number. If I take my variable num, which is going to be storing the number that the user enters, let's say that the user enters something like 10. So the variable num is going to be equal to 10. In this case, the factorial of this number, so 10 factorial, is just going to be equal to 10 times 9 times 8 times 7 and so on till we get to 1. If you look at this, you notice that we're basically doing the same operation again and again. We're multiplying a number with its previous number and we're going to keep doing this. Since we're repeating an operation, it's useful to use a loop to find a factorial. Here, what's important is that num is a variable. The user can enter any value. Here, if num was something like 6, then we're going to find 6 factorial. We're going to start at 6 and we're going to multiply with each integer till we get to 1. If the user entered maybe something like 15, then we're going to find out 15 factorial. So we're going to start at 15 now and we're going to multiply with every previous integer till we reach 1. And from those examples, we can see that there is a general pattern. We're starting at the variable num and we're going to keep multiplying with some previous integer till we reach 1. If I use an iterator I, since the initial value is at the variable num, it means that we have to initialize I to num. And since the final value has to be 1, the condition is going to be something like I is greater than or equal to 1. As long as this condition is true, we're going to keep multiplying with the previous integer. When I becomes something like 0, we can't multiply anymore. We can only multiply till 1. And that's why our condition would look like this. I is greater than or equal to 1. We can also see from this example that a factorial is just multiplying every number with a previous number. So if this was num, this would just be num minus 1. This would be num minus 1 minus 1, num minus 2. And this would be num minus 3, and so on. Since we're decreasing by 1, we're just decreasing the value of I by 1 every single iteration. So here our update would be I minus minus. Basically, this would be the initialization of our iterator. This would be our update, and this would be our condition. So here, if I take this example again, since the value of num is 5, our iterator I is going to start at 5. Every iteration it's going to decrease by 1. So it's going to become 4 after the first iteration. It's going to become 3 after the second iteration. It's going to become 2 after the third iteration. And finally it's going to become 1. You can see that by using this iterator, update and condition, we've completed most of our program. Let's just rewrite the iterator, condition and update using an actual loop. For this program, I'm going to use a for loop. So when we create the for loop, we're going to first initialize I to num. Then we're going to check our condition if I is greater than or equal to 1. And our update is just decreasing I by 1. Using this loop, our variable I is going to start at num. It's going to keep decreasing by 1 till we finally reach 1. But how do I actually use this loop to find a factorial of a number? Let's say that the user enters the value of num as something like 5. Our variable I is going to initialize to 5, and every single iteration is going to decrease by 1. So after the first iteration, it's going to become 4. In the next iteration, it's going to become 3. In the next iteration, it's going to become 2. And finally, in the last iteration, it's going to become 1. If I want to find a factorial, I just need to multiply the value of I at every single iteration. Since I want to find a factorial, I'll obviously need to use a variable to do this. Let's use a variable called factorial. So I'm going to write a variable over here. Let's say that we call this variable factorial, and we'll initialize this variable to 1. What if I just multiply this variable factorial with the value of I at every single iteration? Here, if I take the variable factorial, it's starting at 1. In our first iteration, we're going to multiply it with 5. So we're going to multiply 5. In the next iteration, I becomes 4. So we're going to multiply it with 4. After that, I becomes 3. And now we're going to multiply it with 3. Then I becomes 2. So we're just going to multiply 2. And finally, we're going to multiply 1. Multiplying by 1 doesn't do anything. So we can just ignore this 1 times. You notice that this is exactly what we have in our example. Using this variable factorial and our iterator I, we can find out the factorial of a number. An important thing you need to notice is that I initialized this variable factorial to 1 and not 0. If I instead made this something like 0, in that case, I'm just multiplying 0 with all of these values. And that's just going to give us 0. We won't find a factorial of a number, we just get 0 as the output. This is why I need to initialize this to be 1. And we can use this simple idea to write a program. So we first have a for loop where we have a variable I starting at num. We have a condition that's checking if I is greater than or equal to 1. And we just have our update that's decreasing I by 1. Since we need to create a variable factorial before the loop, we can just add the variable before the loop. So I'm just going to say int factorial is equal to 1. As we already seen before, inside a loop, we just need to multiply this variable factorial with every single value of I. So I can just say that this new value of the variable factorial is the previous value times I. And that's it. That's all you need to do to find a factorial. Let's manually execute this loop to show that this indeed finds the factorial of the number. Let's say that the value of num that the user enters is something like 3. So here, the value of I is going to be 3. We're going to start with the initialization. So we're going to initialize I to be 3, and then we're going to move on to the condition. The condition is checking if 3 is greater than or equal to 1. And in this case, this condition is obviously true. Since the condition is true, you're going to move to the inside of your loop. And here we have the statement factorial is factorial times I. We'll just track factorial over here. So the variable factorial is initially 1. And I can rewrite this statement as factorial is equal to the current value of the variable. So that's 1 times the value of I. I is 3. So I can just write 3. Then we're going to move on to the update. The update is just decreasing I by 1. So I is now going to become 2. Our condition is now checking if 2 is greater than or equal to 1. This condition is again true. And since the condition is true, you're going to move on to the block of code inside of for loop. Inside of for loop, we're again multiplying factorial with the value of I. Just like we've seen here, we're multiplying the value of factorial with this new value of I. In this case, I is now 2. So you can rewrite this as factorial is equal to 1 times 3, that's the current value of factorial, times the current value of I, that's just 2. Once we complete this, we're going to move back to our update. Our update is going to decrease I again. So I is now going to become 1. Once we update the value of I, we're going to move to the condition. Now our condition is checking if 1 is greater than or equal to 1. 1 is not greater than 1, but 1 is equal to 1. This condition is again true. Since the condition is true, you're going to multiply the variable factorial with I again. The variable factorial is now equal to 1 times 3 times 2. We're going to multiply this with I, and since I is 1, you're just going to multiply 1. After this, we're going to move to the update. The update is going to decrease the value of I from 1 to 0, and we're going to move to the condition. Now our condition is checking if 0 is greater than or equal to 1. This condition is obviously false. Since the condition is false, we'll stop executing this loop and we'll just move on to the rest of our program. You can see that by the time we finish executing this loop, we can find the factorial of the number. When num is entered as 3, we find that the factorial is 3 times 2 times 1, and we can store this in this variable factorial. You can try it with other values as well, and you'll see that it works just the same. Now let's just rewrite this for loop in our code editor. First, we're creating the variable factorial. So we're going to say int factorial is equal to 1. So we're going to have our brackets and then our parentheses. First, we're just initializing our iterator I. So we're going to set our iterator I to whatever value the user enters. So num. And then we're going to check our condition. As long as I is greater than or equal to 1, you're going to keep executing this loop. You're going to keep multiplying factorial with the value of I. And finally, we have our update. That's just decreasing the value of I by 1. In the loop, we're just multiplying factorial with I. So factorial is now going to be factorial times the value of I. Every single iteration, you're going to multiply factorial with every single value of I so that you can find the factorial of the number. By the time we finish executing this loop, as you can see over here, this variable factorial is going to be storing the factorial of the number. If I want to display the factorial of the number, I just need to print the variable factorial. So here, I can just add a println statement. And I can say that the factorial of the number is, and we can add factorial. And that's it. This is going to be finding the factorial of the number, and this println statement is going to be printing the factorial. With that, we're done with both our steps 2 and 3. To see if our program works well, let's just run this program. And let's enter the value of num as 5. 5 factorial is already given as 120. So when I click enter, you notice that we do get that the factorial is 120. Our program works perfectly well.